it was amazing. It's with family at home. Long nervous wait, really long night. And I'm just stoked. Couldn't be more wrapped. It's a really ideal situation. I can't wait to get stuck into it with the boys.
The voice you heard there was Ryan Byrnes, taken by the Saints with their first pick. Had to wait a little while, deep into the second night of the draft, but fantastic to have him on board, and fantastic to have our next guest with us as well. Chris Toce joining us from the St Kilda Recruiting Department to give us an insight into how the process all works. He's the regional manager for Victoria and the Allies, keeping an eye on all of the kids ahead of the draft. Chris, thanks for popping in and joining us for our podcast this week.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Mentioned at the start there that the draft haul, unfortunately for the Saints, was decimated. I guess at the start of the year, you'd sit down and think, we might have picks 4, 8, 17 and 25 to deal with, and I can look at some of the absolute top end of town, but I guess when you get a trade haul like the Saints did, it leaves the barrel a little thin.
Yeah, it certainly did. James Gallagher left us with a pretty ordinary draft hand in the end, but I think, as a holistic look at the draft and the trade period, I mean, as recruiters, we were absolutely thrilled with the draft haul the trade haul that Gags was able to facilitate. And I think in the end we only had the 3 picks at the draft, but we're really happy with how it went. And I think the thing that's most pleasing is that you look at our list this year compared to this time last year, and I think we're positioned in a much better way, so that's really exciting.
Thanks for joining us, Chris. Now, the makeup of the recruiting team, what's the levels that work, and who recruits, who responds to who's in charge, makes the top decisions? What's the breakdown of it all?
Yeah, we're actually a pretty small group, so I'd say probably average in terms of staff, looking at it from a holistic sort of AFL point of view. We've got Chris Liberatore, who's the National Recruiting Manager, so he oversees the recruiting department. Then there's myself. I manage Victoria and the Allies states, so that's sort of Tassie, New South Wales, ACT, Queensland and NT. It sounds like a lot, but it's not that hard. And then we've got Simon Guest as well, who looks after South Australia and Western Australia. And then obviously then there's James Gallagher, who really is the head of the list management and recruiting department. And then you've got Steve Lennie, who you guys spoke to last time, who just focuses on the pro scouting aspect. So even though we have sort of specific areas to manage as a recruiting team, being myself, Libber and Guesty, we really share all the duties in terms of watching the talent across Australia. So even though I manage Victoria, I'll see just as much footy in South Australia and Western Australia as the other guys.
Chris, what is obviously you go to a lot of games, you see a lot of games live, and you watch the tape. What is kind of your Monday to Friday, kind of normal work week entail?
Yeah, everyone's always fascinated by that. Obviously, the weekends are pretty self-explanatory, but on a Monday, there's every chance on a weekend that at least 2 of us in the recruiting team have travelled that weekend. So we try to work from home on a Monday, knock off our reports. So obviously we need to be reporting on the players that we've watched on the weekend. So that can take half a day or almost a full day, depending on how many players you're reporting on. And then we sort of use that day as well to, I guess, follow up with the NAB League clubs or state league level clubs. If someone got injured on the weekend, we might want to get a little update on how they're going and that sort of stuff. On a Tuesday, we're all in the office. We get together as a list management or as a list and recruiting group with Gags and Steve Lennie involved as well, and we just have a little chat about what we saw on the weekend and who are the movers and shakers and who's rising up the board and maybe who's going the other way as well. And we'll also sort of sit down and maybe have a little look at what the next weekend looks like in terms of where we're going to head. The rest of Tuesday is basically just watching vision. So we're really lucky that Champion Data, they code all the vision for us. So we've got everything available to us almost, either Monday afternoon or definitely by Tuesday. So we'll spend the rest of the day watching vision. Wednesday we have a day off, which is great. Although being in such a job, being in a job like this that you really love, you do end up probably opening up the laptop for a while and watching a bit more vision. Thursday again is just more vision. There's just so many players to watch across Australia, and you can't be at everything on the weekend. So we'll usually spend a lot of Thursday watching vision as well, and then Friday is usually either a travelling day if you're going to Perth or South Australia. or during I guess the middle of the year we have school footy here as well, and they tend to play some of their games on a Friday afternoon, so we'll get out to some of those too.
So you mentioned that you can't kind of get out to all the games, which makes sense because there's hundreds of games across the country kind of every weekend. But who decides and how do you decide which games that you're going to go to and which players you're specifically going to watch on a given day? Yeah,
so we sort of start the year with a really large follow list. So we'll have a document, a working document with every league, so NAB league, Sandful, Waffle, etc., and all the players that are of interest to us. And we've sort of gathered that data, having watched these guys probably from under 16s onwards, so we sort of know who's who. And we also spend some time in the pre-season going to meet with all these clubs. So we'll literally go and meet every Sandful, Waffle and NAB league club to get the lay of the land and I guess get their impression on who are the players that we should be watching. So then from there, when we're actually deciding the games on the weekend, we just sort of sit down and prioritise the games, I guess, where the most talent is. But we're also trying to balance the load and the travel on all of us as well. So we sort of basically rotate between Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia. And we're really lucky that we've got a really dedicated network of part-time scouts as well. So obviously between the three of us, we can really only get to about 6 games a weekend maximum. So we utilise our network of part-time scouts to get to the games that we can't be at as well. So, they're really the unsung heroes of recruiting because, they do a lot of work for not a lot of monetary reward, and they're doing it for either the love of the game or love of the club, or striving to be a full-time recruiter themselves, which is sort of how I got into it.
Now, when we spoke to Steve, he spoke about almost scouting opposition players and building those reports on sort of how all that works. From your point of view, I guess tying that in together, if St Kilda haven't drafted a particular player and then 3 to 4 years later they're potentially on the market or they're thrown up for a trade or the club's looking at them, is it something where they go back to initial reports from you guys and say, what was your draft impression? Has it turned out the way you thought it would with this player at AFL level? What do you think we need to do? Is it worthwhile? Does it sort of come back to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We build profiles on all these guys when they're 18. And as I said, that can start from when they're 16 years of age. So there's a hell of a lot of information and reports, match reports, psych reports, medical testing, stuff on their character as well. So yeah, Steve will definitely touch base with us and get our impressions and maybe even ask us where they played as a junior, because quite often they come into the system and they might end up playing somewhere else, and we might really have liked a guy as a midfielder and now he's playing half back and not getting an opportunity in the midfield. So Steve can then use that information, I guess, to help him target guys at the AFL level.
I know it's going off on a tangent a little bit, but you did mention then the psychological profile and things like that. I read about some of the Gold Coast players and some of the questions they were asked, things like if a train was going to kill a worker on the track and you could divert it down a path but it might run over these kids or something, what are you doing? Can you shed any light on why they would ask questions like that and what you could possibly get out of how they'd answer that?
No, it's a question that gets asked a lot. I mean, we're pretty straight up and down, the Saints. Yeah. We tend to go more line and length than that, but each to their own, I suppose. I can only imagine that they're doing it to see how they react under pressure.
Yeah.
Quite often what happens by the end of the year in particular, all these players that are at the combine or highly touted draftee or potential draftees, they've got player managers. They've been coached up a lot in terms of how to respond to questions in interviews, and they're usually pretty polished by the end of the year. So it can be a good idea to get them at the start of the year. But yeah, so I think it would just be to see how they react to a bit of a tricky question. But yeah, no, we tend to be a bit more straight up and down.
Now, following on from that, you tend to go out to some of the families and players in the areas out in the country or even local in the city. You get to know them quite well, get to know the families, where they come from and all that sort of thing. But if it came down to it, would you be more looking at picking a player that fills a position or picking the player that fits into the club? Which would be the priority?
Yeah, to be honest, you're always striving for perfection, so you're looking for a bit of both. We do a hell of a lot of work in terms of speaking to families, but not just families, but then doing a lot of reference checking in terms of speaking to their club, their school, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, we would never draft a player unless we've been in their home and met their family. So, we need to have a good feel from the player based on, that character assessment. But also taking into account that not everyone's perfect and, people have different upbringings and, you have to be really mindful of that. And then in terms of the positional needs and fits like that, that's really more of a list management discussion. You're always just trying to pick good players at the draft. You don't want to force things too much. If there's a really talented player sitting there, but he's not necessarily a need, but he's 10 spots higher than the player you need on your board, then I think you go with the talent and just try and make it work.
How much of a role does analytics play in youth recruitment, and does it play as much of a part as when you're looking at kind of professional players to bring into the club, or is it more about kind of the eye test and what they look like when they're playing against kids their own age? Yeah,
it's a good question. I think it has more relevance, analytics, at the next level, at AFL level, mainly because we're not getting the same stats that you get at AFL level. We're getting a very much a dumbed-down version of what you can access at AFL level, so it's hard to quantify some things. But where we've sort of used it this year, without giving too much away, is, I guess, looking at some players that have been successful at AFL level, having a look at what they look like as juniors, and then, I guess, trying to draw some comparisons or parallels with some guys that are currently in the draft pool. And, and it can throw up some really interesting results. So they might throw up a player that you haven't necessarily been drawn to with your eye. But that's a really good thing, because then it's like, okay, well then let's go and watch this guy for a month. The numbers are telling us that, he's tracking similarly to a Patrick Cripps or someone like that at a junior level. So, maybe we're missing something. It's just a really good tool to have, I guess, on your side to check yourself. But yeah, it's dangerous in recruiting. You don't want to base your decisions on any one thing. You've got to use all the tools and all the information you've got at hand to make the best possible decision.
Now, we often hear the word steal, so I guess a two-part question. I guess your thoughts on Ryan Byrnes, who a lot of people tip would have gone a bit earlier than he did for us, and I guess the second part of that question, when it comes down to a situation with Biggie Newen, who's been at the club for a couple of years, Richmond put a bid in, St Kilda decides not to match. How much do they lean on even your guys' research about, well, who could we get in the draft? Where did you have this kid? Sort of how does that work out?
Yeah, well, I'll start with Ryan. Ryan, we were thrilled. Every recruiter says that, don't they? But we really were. We were thrilled to get Ryan. We rated him pretty highly. So we rated him a lot higher than where we ended up picking him in the draft. Our intel leading into the draft suggested to us that there was probably one club picking just before us that were likely to take him. It just so happened that another player slid through to them that they preferred to Ryan, and that pushed Ryan out to us. So if you had have asked us on the day of the draft, not that we would have told you at that point, but Ryan was the one that we thought, he's the one probably rated high-ish on our board that might get through to us. So we were really pleased. He had a very consistent year. He was captain of Sandringham and won their best and fairest. And we really went into the draft wanting to pick another midfielder. We felt like our group or our list as it stands, we could really use with some more young mids coming through. So that was a bit of a non-negotiable for us. We were always going to pick a midfielder if one was there. And in terms of Biggie, well, yeah, it's a bit of a bittersweet one with Biggie, because the club did some amazing work with him. I think Biggie would be the first to tell you that he leaves St Kilda Footy Club as a better footballer and a better person. He's a great young man, really popular. Unfortunately, on the night, we just had some players ranked above him, and we had to be true to our rankings. As much as it can appear a bit brutal on the outside, we just had a couple of players ranked above him, and we have to be true to our all the work that we've done through the year. We were thrilled that Biggie gets an opportunity. We wish him well. I think Richmond have got themselves a player there that has a lot of potential. We just preferred some others on the night.
So going back a year to a player like Jack Bytel, how much work goes into looking at a player that potentially was going to go a top 10,
yep,
but got injured, slips back a fair way, obviously. How much free rein is there sort of going, okay, we'll look at a player like that, pick him up, work on him, bring him back in a couple of years' time, or potentially this year coming up.
Yeah.
The benefits of doing that, and what's the risk that a club will take on a player like that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. We rated Jack very highly, not just as a player, but character-wise. He's got some real leadership potential as well. He's a very bubbly, energetic person, and so from a list point of view, we felt like he was a good fit for us, not just as a player, but also personality-wise. So we were well aware that when we picked Jack, based on the medical screening that our doctors had done on him, he wasn't going to play this year at all.
Yep.
But what gave us real confidence was that they said, we'll go in, we'll fix his back straight away, and he's going to be fine. So it's not something that should bother him long term. It's fixable. So let's be patient. This guy's a really talented player. Let's just go ahead and do it. Even though we'd already picked Max King as well, and there was obviously, it was unlikely that Max was going to get to the line last year. Although he ended up playing for some really good footy for Sandringham, and I'm sure he would have debuted if not for that ankle injury. But no, we just had to take a really patient approach, and as I mentioned before, we just pick the talent. Jack's flying at the moment. He looks $1 million. I watched some match sim on Monday, and he really stood out. He looks like the benefit of not playing last year and getting in the gym is that he looks like a third or fourth year player now. So I'd be pretty certain that Jack will play some AFL footy next year, which would be really exciting.
You mentioned earlier about having some whispers that there was another club or a couple of clubs that were interested in taking Ryan before we had our first pick. Do you guys play mind games with other clubs and kind of, maybe leak some information that you're looking at someone in particular so that someone else could get through? Or how do you kind of deal with that kind of perception from other clubs and fans that are wondering why you didn't take a certain player at this point?
Yeah. I don't think we really go out of our way to play mind games, but you can overthink things a fair bit. So, we did get that information on Ryan, but there was no guarantee that was going to be right either. You get a lot of intel talking to player managers or just keeping your ear to the ground. It's amazing this year, because we didn't have an early pick, all the other clubs were pretty happy to talk to us. So we had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen sort of within the first 20, 25 picks. There's definitely times where I've certainly spoken to players in the past, maybe some guys that are a bit more left field, and have spoken to them, and at the end of our chat or the interview that I've done with them said, hey, if anyone else talks to you, if another club talks to you, we were never here, sort of stuff. Because you do, that's what, all the clubs, when they talk to players, particularly those guys that are a little bit more left field, the last question we always ask is, who else have you spoken to? Because you want to get a bit of a feel for, can we let this guy get to the rookie draft, or do we need to jump on someone a little bit earlier if we really, really like someone? So, there are a little bit of mind games out there, but it's not something that we, put a lot of time and effort into.
Just the last one from me, in terms of your own, favourite story, a player that you watched for a long, long time that sort of landed at the club or even slipped through and landed somewhere else and is therefore a hard luck story. But is there one in particular that sort of stands out for you that you think, I'm really glad we plucked this kid? Yeah,
there's probably a couple. I think I'm always a bit of a sucker for those stories where guys have persevered. It's not, it shouldn't be that hard to pick the guys at the top of the draft, but it's probably the guys that get out to rookie picks. They're the ones that I tend to like. So like a Rowan Marshall, he's missed out as an 18-year-old, as a 19-year-old, had to go play VFL footy. He wasn't getting a game for North Ballarat in the VFL. He was playing for Sebastopol. I think he won the Sebastopol's best and fairest, playing about 10 games in that year. And then the next year, he did play for North Ballarat and he played at centre-half back predominantly. We never really thought he was going to be a centre-half back. We liked him forward and ruck. But there's a guy that's just not soaked up. He's just gone and gradually got better and better. And I guess that's what he's been doing now that he's landed with us. He just gradually getting better and better. So, that's a really good story, I think, and someone that we really liked and has worked out well. And Cal Wilkie's probably another one. You know, I think you'd all agree that Cal's just so reliable and dependable for a guy who's only had 1 year in the system. I know whenever I saw Cal near the ball last year, I just felt like he was going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And Cal's a bit like Rowan, you know, he's had to really bide his time. Cal was not really a sexy player to watch in the sandful. He was a little bit, he wasn't in the best condition. He sort of runs with a bit of a broom sort of up his back, and you know, but what he does do is he's just incredibly smart. He gets to the right spots. He takes marks off the opposition. He helps set up your defence, and he never wastes the ball when he's got it. So, he's another one that, you know, really we think of pretty fondly in the recruiting team, that's for sure.
Now, we were talking before about how you get to know families and that sort of thing. You would get to know a few of them quite well that we don't actually draft. Keeping tabs with them and keeping in touch with them and finding out where they are, if they're at a club, they're not really getting games or things like that. Do you keep talking to them much and over the years, or
it's probably not one where we talk to the family directly. It might be through the manager more so. So look, whenever we go into someone's home, we go in there trying to make a really good impression on them as well. Like, as much as a player, it's a job interview for the player that we're talking to. We're really mindful of the fact that we want to represent the St Kilda Footy Club in the best way possible, so that if one day down the track they are disgruntled at a club, they remember us fondly.
You re-establish that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's probably where Gags gets involved, and he'll probably talk to player managers and sort of manage that relationship through the agents. Yeah.
Mate, last one from me. It's a bit of a two-pronged question, but who makes the final call on draft night when you're sitting at the table and you've got to call out a name? And secondly, we've all kind of seen the videos of the new guys and seen kind of the cookie cutter trade report or draft reports and kind of the summaries on each of the guys. Is there one point that you could tell the listeners about each of the three guys that maybe they wouldn't have seen or read before?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the decision, so Lib is the recruiting manager. So ultimately, if I really like a player, I need to convince Libba he's the one. So, so Libba is responsible for the national draft. But I guess we need to also present our draft order to list management committee as well, and it has to get ticked off sort of up the line prior to the draft. So. There's a bit of a process there, but Libba's the man on draft night. And in terms of the draftees, I guess some pretty basic info on the guys. I think Ryan lives about literally 2 minutes from the club. We, as a recruiting myself and Simon Guest, there's a smoothie bar not far from the club where we go 2 or 3 times a week, and we literally drove past Ryan's house every day for about 6 months this year. And every time we drove past, we said, "Oh, there's Ryan. We might pick him." But yeah, right. Look, Ryan's he's a smaller mid, but what we really like about Ryan is his ability to use his legs and get out of stoppage. He's got a good turn of speed. I'm not comparing him to Jack Stephen, but if you can imagine how you remember we had, Stuv would use his legs and get out the front of a stoppage. That's the sort of stuff that Ryan can do, and he also kicks really well on either foot. Leo Connolly is a Gippy boy. He's super talented. I think without putting too much pressure on him, although he likes to talk it up himself, I think he's probably, if not the best, maybe the second best kick in the draft this year. He's an exceptional kick of the footy. He's a right footer, but if you ask him, he says he's not sure which one's his better one. So he's just a really talented person. He's a good cricketer. He's taught himself how to play piano and guitar, and he sings, and he's just one of those annoying people that's really good at everything. I hate those guys because I'm not good at anything, other than recruiting, of course. And Jack Bell, Jack's going to be a long-term project for us. He's 202 centimetres, but we really wanted to pick somebody that could play forward and a bit of ruck as well this year. He's another one that lives just down the road. He's pretty much best mates with Max King, so Max was wrapped to get him through the door. What we really liked about Jack was his ability to win the ball in a lot of different ways. So he can take a big spectacular mark, His forward craft's good, so he can get off someone on the lead. His ground ball is really, really good for his size. So he's a difficult matchup. He's just going to have to put on 10 to 15 kilos before he's going to be considered for the next level. But Jack knows that. He's patient, and we're looking at him with a very much a long-term view. But they've all hit the ground running. They've made a really good impression, and I think. Yeah, so far so good.
Chris, thank you for stopping by and giving us those insights into the inner workings of the recruiting department. Certainly been an exciting off-season. Enjoy a little break. I know you're still monitoring some of the little camps that the Metro and the Vic Country boys and those guys are doing over this summer period, but hopefully a bit of a break and come back refreshed, ready to cast the eye over thousands.
Yeah, thanks guys. Anytime.